Ramadan. Just as a reminder, uh, this was a request for a little bit of a refresher before the month of Ramadan begins. And the way, inshallah, we'll do it briefly is just to go through like a day of Ramadan, a day of fasting, and address some of the issues that come up, and then inshallah some of the advices that were given by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the companions and the scholars on how to benefit from our Ramadan bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So as Ramadan begins and it is announced when the first of Ramadan will be, the first question that a person asks or should ask is when or who should be fasting, who is qualified or who is required to fast. And we know obviously that it is mandatory on anyone who has reached the age of puberty. And the issue people ask about children fasting, and they can fast when they can tolerate it and when it doesn't cause them harm. And of course the person, so it's a requirement when they reach puberty as a Muslim and sane, of course, and that they are pure, and this is for the sisters, from their menstrual cycle or from nifas, from their postpartum bleeding. And so when the moon, if a person fulfills those conditions, then it is obligatory for them to fast. They don't have to fast, of course, if they are sick or if they are traveling. If they are ill, an illness here is not something that is set by the Sharia. The Sharia doesn't come and tell us this illness you fast and this illness you do not. But it is basically going to be determined by whether fasting would harm the person who's ill, or their health would further deteriorate by fasting. Then in this case, they should not fast. They should not fast. If it's a temporary illness, meaning there is the expectation that they're going to be better after Ramadan, then they would just make up that day or the amount of days that they missed after Ramadan. If it's a permanent illness, meaning there's not an expectation that they will be able to fast again in the entirety of their lifetime, then they obviously do not make it up. They just pay the fidya, which is the equivalent of feeding one poor person per day that they miss. Okay? So this is how a person who's ill would treat their fasting. And just because a person is ill and is unable to fast, it doesn't mean that Ramadan is not for them. Right? Rather, Ramadan for them is just going to look a little bit different. And each of our Ramadans is different than the person who is next to you. Right? It's about taking advantage of the opportunities and the resources and the gifts that Allah Azza wa Jal gives you. So the person who's sick, I know a lot of people, they feel like a sense of guilt, or they feel a sense of, well, I'm missing out because everyone is fasting and I'm not. My Ramadan is not to their level. No, this is not the case. Right? In fact, Allah Azza wa Jal, if a person is excused from fasting, the ibadah for them is to not fast. Right? And then to utilize the other, maybe now they have more strength or more ability to do other things, and they can do those things, inshallah. Obviously, also sisters who are pregnant or who are, nursing, if the doctor tells them that fasting would be harmful for them, their health or the health of their child, then they are also allowed to break their fast, and they would make it up. Unless some of the scholars give exceptions to this, if the woman is constantly breastfeeding or constantly pregnant and constantly unable to fast year after year, then some have allowed for her to just feed, right? To just make it up by feeding one poor person instead of having to make it up because it becomes too much for her. Also, the traveler, like we said, does not have to fast. Is it better for a person to fast or to not fast when they're traveling? It goes back to them, really. The Prophet ﷺ, he says, لَيْسَ مِنَ الْبِرِّ الصِّيَامِ فِي السَّفَرِ, that there's no extra level of piety for fasting while you travel. So it goes back to the condition of the person. If there's excessive hardship on them in traveling and fasting, then it's better for them to take the rukhsa, take the session and not fast and make it up after Ramadan. If there's not excessive hardship, it's easy for them, there's no issue or it's just normal, then there's no issue with them to fast. There's no issue with them to fast and to take advantage of the benefit of the month of Ramadan. But if there's no hardship at all and they're still allowed to break their fast, this is a concession that they still have, and of course they would make it up after the month of Ramadan. So just to go back to illness as well, illness here, there's the scholars, they say light sickness, significant sickness and serious sickness. And just to clarify, the sickness that a person should or can break their fast in is a person if they fear that they will increase in their sickness or the sickness will cause extra difficulty in fasting, or will delay their recovery.